Grace Morrison adjusted her black serving apron for the third time that evening. Feeling completely out of place among the glittering crowd at the Riverside Grand Hotel, the charity gala buzzed with energy as Boston's wealthiest citizens mingled beneath sparkling chandeliers. At 27, Grace had never imagined she would be serving champagne to millionaires, but life had taught her that pride meant nothing when your child needed you. Her daughter Lily had been born with a rare heart condition that required constant medical attention. Teaching music at Riverside Elementary barely covered the basics, so Grace had taken this second job with the catering company. Every dollar counted toward the surgery Lily would need next year. "Hey, Grace. Check out that piano," whispered her coworker Bethany, nodding toward an elegant grand piano standing alone in the corner of the ballroom. The instrument gleamed under the lights, looking almost lonely despite its beauty. "I heard the musician they hired canceled at the last minute. Some big-shot pianist from New York." Grace glanced at the piano and felt a familiar ache in her chest. She had once dreamed of performing on stages like this, back when she studied at Boston Conservatory. That felt like a lifetime ago, before Lily was born, before her parents passed away in the accident, before responsibility became more important than dreams. "That's too bad," Grace replied softly. Balancing her tray of champagne glasses, Bethany's eyes sparkled with mischief. "Didn't you study piano or something? You should go play." Imagine the look on these rich people's faces when a server sits down at their fancy piano. Grace shook her head firmly. "I need this job, Bethany. I can't risk getting fired over a stupid prank. Come on, where's your sense of adventure? I bet you can't even play anymore. Those skills probably disappeared years ago." Bethany's tone was teasing, but something in her words struck a nerve. Grace felt her jaw tighten. She might be working 2 jobs and struggling to make ends meet, but she was not someone whose talents had simply vanished. Music lived in her bones, in her soul. It was the one part of herself she had never truly lost, even when everything else fell apart. "Hold this," Grace said quietly, handing Bethany her tray. Bethany's eyes widened. "Wait, I was just joking. You're not actually going to do it, are you?" But Grace was already walking toward the piano, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and excitement. She could feel curious eyes turning toward her as she approached the instrument. The event coordinator, a stressed-looking woman clutching a tablet, hurried over. "Excuse me, you can't just— I heard you lost your pianist tonight," Grace interrupted gently. "I can help." The coordinator looked her up and down, taking in the catering uniform. "You're a server. I'm also a pianist. I studied at Boston Conservatory." Grace held the woman's skeptical gaze. "What do you have to lose? If I'm terrible, you can stop me after one song." After a long pause, the coordinator sighed. "Fine. One piece. But if this doesn't work, you leave the piano immediately." Grace approached the beautiful instrument and sat down on the bench, adjusting it to the right height. Her hands trembled slightly as she placed them on the keys. Around her, conversations had quieted. People were watching now, some with amusement, others with curiosity. She could practically feel their judgment. Their assumptions about a server who dared to touch such an expensive piano. She closed her eyes and thought of Lily, her brave, beautiful daughter who smiled through pain, who never complained about the endless doctor visits, who believed her mother could do anything. Grace took a deep breath and began to play the opening notes of Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major flowed from her fingers like water from a stream. The melody was hauntingly beautiful, filled with longing and quiet strength. As Grace played, something magical happened. The muscle memory she thought she had lost returned instantly. Her fingers knew exactly where to go, how much pressure to apply, when to let the notes breathe. The ballroom fell completely silent. Champagne glasses were lowered. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Even the servers stood frozen, watching in amazement. The music swelled and receded like ocean waves, telling a story of dreams deferred but never forgotten, of love that endures through hardship, of hope that refuses to die. Grace lost herself in the music, forgetting the crowd, forgetting her circumstances, forgetting everything except the conversation between her heart and the piano. When she played the final notes, letting them fade gently into silence, she slowly opened her eyes. The silence continued for one heartbeat, then two. Then applause erupted throughout the ballroom, starting as a ripple and building into a wave of enthusiastic appreciation. Grace stood, her cheeks flushed, and gave a small, uncertain bow. She felt dizzy with relief and disbelief. The event coordinator rushed over, no longer looking stressed but excited. "That was incredible. Would you consider playing a few more pieces?" "We'll pay you, of course." Before Grace could respond, she noticed a tall man making his way through the crowd toward her. Jonathan Sterling was impossible to miss. At 38, he had the commanding presence of someone who was used to controlling rooms full of powerful people. His dark hair was touched with gray at the temples, and his deep brown eyes seemed to see everything. He was the host of tonight's gala, the billionaire philanthropist whose company had revolutionized medical technology. Grace had served him champagne earlier in the evening. He had barely glanced at her then. Now his full attention was focused on her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Who are you?" he asked when he reached her, his voice low and serious. "Grace Morrison," she replied. Suddenly, very aware of her simple uniform compared to the elegant gowns and tuxedos surrounding them. "Where did you study music?" "Boston Conservatory. But I didn't finish. I had to leave during my final year." Something flickered in Jonathan's eyes. "Why?" The question was direct, almost invasive, but Grace found herself answering honestly. "Life happened. My circumstances changed, and I had to make different choices." Jonathan studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "Play something else," he said. Though his tone was gentle, it was clearly not a request, but an expectation. Grace sat back down at the piano, her mind racing. She chose Debussy's Clair de Lune, a piece about moonlight and dreams. As her fingers began the opening notes, she couldn't shake the feeling that something important had just shifted in her life. She didn't know what it meant or where it would lead, but she could feel it as surely as she felt the keys beneath her hands. Behind her, Jonathan Sterling stood completely still, watching her play with an expression that none of his business associates had ever witnessed before. For the first time in years, something had penetrated the carefully constructed walls around his heart. The music spoke to a part of him he had thought was dead. Awakening emotions he had buried after personal tragedy had shaped him into the cold, controlled man he had become, as the last notes of Clair de Lune faded into the air. Jonathan knew with absolute certainty that Grace Morrison had just walked into his life for a reason. He didn't believe in fate or destiny, but he believed in recognizing opportunity when it presented itself. This woman, this struggling server who played like an angel, had just changed everything. The week following the charity gala felt surreal to Grace Morrison. She had returned home that night with $500 in cash, payment for her impromptu performance. The money went straight into the glass jar labeled Lily's surgery fund that sat on her kitchen counter, a constant reminder of why she worked herself to exhaustion every day. "Mommy, can we have pancakes for breakfast?" Lily asked on Saturday morning, her small face brightening with hope. At 6 years old, she was tiny for her age. With Grace's dark hair and eyes that sparkled with innocence despite the medical challenges she faced daily. "Absolutely," Grace replied, pulling her daughter into a warm hug. "Chocolate chip pancakes, your favorite?" As they sat together at their small kitchen table in the modest apartment, Grace watched Lily carefully cut her pancakes into perfect squares, the way she always did. These quiet moments were precious, reminders of what truly mattered in life. The apartment might be small and the furniture secondhand, but it was filled with love. Grace's phone rang just as she finished washing the dishes. The number was unfamiliar, but something compelled her to answer. "Miss Morrison, this is Thomas Crawford, personal assistant to Jonathan Sterling." Grace nearly dropped the dish she was holding. "Yes. Mr. Sterling would like to meet with you to discuss a potential opportunity. Would you be available Monday afternoon at 2 o'clock? Grace's mind raced. "I teach until 3 on Mondays, but I could meet at 4. That will be acceptable. I'll send you the address. Mr. Sterling looks forward to speaking with you." After the call ended, Grace stared at her phone in disbelief. What could Jonathan Sterling possibly want with her? She thought back to the intensity in his eyes as he watched her play, the way he had commanded her to continue performing. There had been something almost desperate in his expression, though she couldn't imagine why. "Who was that, Mommy?" Lily asked, looking up from the coloring book spread across the living room floor. "Just someone about a possible job, sweetheart. Nothing for you to worry about." But Grace was worrying enough for both of them. She called her neighbor, Mrs. Chen, a retired school teacher who often helped with childcare. "Of course I can watch Lily on Monday," Mrs. Chen assured her warmly. "This sounds important, dear. You should go." Monday afternoon arrived with Grace standing nervously outside Sterling Tower, a gleaming skyscraper in downtown Boston. She had chosen her most professional outfit, a gray dress that had seen better days, but was clean and modest. As she rode the elevator to the 45th floor, her stomach churned with anticipation and anxiety. Thomas Crawford met her at the elevator, a distinguished man in his 50s with kind eyes and an efficient manner. "Miss Morrison, thank you for coming. Mr. Sterling is expecting you." He led her through an impressive office suite to a set of polished wooden doors. Inside, Jonathan Sterling's office was surprisingly understated. Yes, it was spacious with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a stunning view of Boston Harbor. But it lacked the ostentatious displays of wealth she had expected. Instead, she noticed photographs on the walls, black and white images of landscapes and architecture that suggested an appreciation for art and beauty. Jonathan rose from behind his desk as she entered. In the afternoon light, he looked slightly less intimidating than he had at the gala, though his presence still commanded the room. "Miss Morrison, please sit down. Would you like coffee or tea?" "Water would be fine, thank you," Grace replied, settling into the chair across from his desk. After Thomas brought water and quietly departed, Jonathan studied her for a moment. "Your performance at the gala was remarkable. I've been to hundreds of similar events, heard countless professional musicians. What you did that night was different." "Thank you," Grace said, unsure where this conversation was heading. "I did some research on you," Jonathan continued, surprising her. "You were on a full scholarship at Boston Conservatory, received outstanding reviews from your instructors, won several regional competitions. Then you simply disappeared from the music world. Your professors said you had tremendous potential." Grace felt a familiar tightness in her chest. "My circumstances changed. I had a daughter to raise and responsibilities that became more important than a music career." "Your daughter has a congenital heart condition," Jonathan stated, rather than asked. At her startled expression, he added, "I'm thorough when something interests me, Miss Morrison. I'm not prying into your private life out of mere curiosity." "Then why are you prying?" Grace asked, feeling a spark of defensive anger despite her nervousness, to her surprise. Jonathan's expression softened slightly. "Because I want to understand why someone with your extraordinary talent is working 2 jobs instead of pursuing the career you were clearly meant for." Grace met his gaze steadily. "Because being a mother is more important than being a pianist. My daughter needs medical care that costs more money than most people can imagine. Teaching music at an underfunded school doesn't cover those expenses, so I do what I must. There's no mystery here, Mr. Sterling. Just ordinary life requiring ordinary sacrifices. There's nothing ordinary about you," Jonathan said quietly. He stood and walked to the window, his back to her. "I want to hire you for something unusual. My mother, Victoria Sterling, is 71 years old. She lives at our family estate outside the city. For the past 3 years, her health has been declining, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally. She barely eats, rarely speaks, shows no interest in anything." He turned back to face Grace. "My mother was a concert pianist before she married my father. Music was her entire world. She taught me to play when I was young, though I never had her talent or passion. After my father died 15 years ago, she gradually withdrew from everything, including music. Now she's like a ghost in her own home." Grace listened quietly, sensing the pain beneath his controlled exterior. "I've tried everything," Jonathan continued. "The best doctors, therapists, medications, nothing reaches her. Then I heard you play at the gala, and something happened inside me that I can't fully explain. Your music didn't just sound beautiful. It felt alive, like it carried emotion and meaning beyond the notes themselves. If anyone can reach my mother through music, I believe it's you. What exactly are you proposing?" Grace asked carefully. I want to hire you to play for my mother. Private performances at the estate twice weekly to start. You would choose the repertoire, though she always loved the romantic composers. Chopin, Liszt, Rachmaninoff. Mr. Sterling, I appreciate the offer, but I'm not a professional performer. I'm an elementary school music teacher who plays piano in her limited free time. Exactly what my mother needs, Jonathan insisted. Professional musicians play with technical perfection, but sometimes without soul. You play with your whole heart. I saw it, I felt it, and I need my mother to feel it too. Grace hesitated. What would the compensation be? $3,000 per session. Grace's breath caught. That amount was staggering, more than she made in a month of teaching. That's excessive. It's what you're worth, Jonathan said firmly. Plus travel expenses and flexible scheduling around your teaching and your daughter's needs. Grace's mind raced with possibilities. That money could cover Lily's surgery, pay off their mounting medical debt, maybe even allow her to work just one job instead of two. But something about the offer felt too good to be true. Why me? She asked again. You could hire any number of accomplished pianists in Boston. Jonathan returned to his desk and sat down, his expression thoughtful. Because when you played at the gala, I saw something in your face. You weren't performing for the audience or for applause. You were playing for yourself, pouring your heart into the music because you needed to, not because you wanted recognition. That authenticity, that raw emotional honesty, is what my mother needs. She can tell the difference between someone going through motions and someone truly feeling the music. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was quieter. My mother is dying, Miss Morrison. Not from any specific illness the doctors can cure, but from having lost her will to live. I'm trying everything I can think of to bring her back to us before it's too late. Your music is my last hope. Grace saw the vulnerability in his eyes, desperate love for his mother that he was trying to hide behind his businesslike manner. She thought of Lily, of how far she would go to help her daughter, what she would sacrifice or risk. How could she refuse this man who was trying to save his mother the only way he knew how? I have conditions, Grace said finally. My daughter comes first, always. If she has a medical appointment or needs me, I cancel without penalty. And I want to meet your mother before committing to anything long-term. If she doesn't respond well to my playing, or if this arrangement isn't helping her, we end it without hard feelings. Jonathan nodded immediately, agreed. Can you come to the estate this Saturday? I'll arrange everything. As Grace left Sterling Tower that afternoon, her head spinning with the implications of what she had agreed to. She couldn't shake the feeling that her life had just taken a dramatic turn. She didn't know yet whether it was for better or worse, but she knew with certainty that Jonathan Sterling had entered her world for a reason that went far beyond a simple employment arrangement. Something deeper was at work here. Something that would change both their lives in ways neither of them could predict. Saturday morning arrived with gray clouds hanging low over Boston, threatening rain. Grace drove her old Honda Civic along the winding coastal road toward the Sterling estate, our hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. Lily sat in the back seat, humming softly to herself as she looked out at the ocean. Grace had decided to bring her daughter along after Jonathan had surprisingly agreed to the request. My mother used to love children, he had said over the phone. Perhaps having a young person in the house will lift her spirits. The Sterling estate appeared through the morning mist like something from a storybook. The sprawling mansion sat on a hill overlooking the Atlantic, surrounded by carefully manicured gardens and ancient oak trees. As Grace pulled up the circular driveway, she felt increasingly out of place. Aware of how her modest car looked against the backdrop of such wealth, Jonathan met them at the front entrance. Dressed casually in dark jeans and a gray sweater that made him look younger and less intimidating than he had in his office. His eyes softened when he saw Lily holding Grace's hand, her small face filled with wonder at the grand house. You must be Lily, Jonathan said, crouching down to her eye level. I'm Jonathan. Welcome to my home. You have a really big house, Lily said with childlike honesty. Do you live here all by yourself? My mother lives here too, Jonathan replied gently. She's been feeling sad lately, and your mother is going to play beautiful music for her. Would you like to help? Lily nodded enthusiastically, her eyes brightening. Grace felt something catch in her throat at the kindness Jonathan showed her daughter, a tenderness she hadn't expected from the intimidating businessman. A housekeeper named Margaret led them through marble hallways adorned with oil paintings and antique furniture. Everything spoke of old money and refined taste, yet Grace noticed something else too. The house felt empty somehow, as though all its beauty couldn't fill the loneliness that permeated its walls. "Mrs. Sterling is in the conservatory," Margaret explained. "She spends most of her time there, though she rarely touches the piano anymore." The conservatory was a glass-enclosed room filled with plants and natural light despite the cloudy day. In the center stood a magnificent Steinway grand piano, its black surface gleaming. Near the windows sat an elegant, elderly woman in a wheelchair. Her silver hair swept back from a face that still showed traces of great beauty. Victoria Sterling gazed out at the gardens with vacant eyes, seemingly unaware of their arrival. "Mother," Jonathan said softly, moving to her side, "I've brought someone to play for you. This is Grace Morrison and her daughter Lily." Victoria slowly turned her head, her pale blue eyes focusing on them with apparent effort. She looked at Grace without expression, and her gaze shifted to Lily. For just a moment, something flickered in those empty eyes. "Hello, Mrs. Sterling," Grace said warmly. "It's an honor to meet you. Your son tells me you're a wonderful pianist." Victoria's lips moved slightly, but no sound emerged. She simply stared at Grace with that hollow expression, then returned her attention to the windows. Jonathan's jaw tightened with frustration and pain. "She hasn't spoken in 3 months," he said quietly. "The doctors say there's no physical reason. She just chooses silence." Grace felt her heart ache for both of them. The mother who had retreated from life, and the son desperately trying to reach her. She glanced at Lily, who was watching Victoria with concern beyond her years. "Mrs. Sterling," Lily said suddenly, walking closer to the wheelchair. "My mommy plays the most beautiful piano. She plays for me when I'm scared at the hospital. It makes me feel better. Maybe it will make you feel better too." Victoria's eyes shifted to Lily again, and this time they lingered. Something in the old woman's expression softened almost imperceptibly. Grace moved to the piano, running her fingers lightly over the keys. The instrument was perfectly maintained, clearly expensive, yet she could sense it had been neglected. Pianos needed to be played regularly to truly live. This one had been silent for too long. "I'm going to play something for you," Grace said to Victoria. "If you want me to stop, just raise your hand." She began with Chopin's Nocturne in C-sharp minor, a piece filled with melancholy beauty. As the music filled the conservatory, Grace watched Victoria from the corner of her eye. The old woman's face remained expressionless, but her hands, which had been lying limply in her lap, slowly moved to grip the arms of her wheelchair. Grace continued playing, losing herself in the music, as she always did. She played Schumann's Kinderschannen, scenes from childhood, thinking of Lily and all the precious moments they had shared despite their struggles. She played Rachmaninoff's Prelude in G minor, powerful and passionate. Speaking of strength found in adversity, when she finished the third piece, the conservatory fell silent except for the soft patter of rain that had begun falling against the glass roof. Grace looked up to find tears streaming down Victoria's face. The old woman's lips were trembling, her hands shaking. Jonathan rushed to his mother's side, kneeling before her wheelchair. "Mother, can you hear me?" Victoria's mouth opened, and after several attempts, a whisper emerged. "Beautiful," she breathed. "So beautiful." The word was barely audible, but it might as well have been shouted. Jonathan's face transformed with emotion, tears springing to his eyes. He took his mother's hand, pressing it to his cheek. "Play more," Victoria whispered, her eyes now focused intently on Grace. "Please." Grace's own eyes filled with tears as she returned to the piano. She played for another hour, choosing pieces that spoke of love, loss, hope, and healing. Lily curled up on a cushioned window seat, watching with quiet contentment. Jonathan remained kneeling beside his mother, holding her hand, occasionally wiping tears from both their faces. When Grace finally stopped, her fingers tired but her heart full, Victoria spoke again. Her voice was stronger now, though still fragile. "You play like someone who understands pain," she said. like someone who has lost things but refuses to give up. Yes, Grace replied honestly. I understand that very well. Victoria's gaze shifted to Lily, your daughter. She's ill? Grace stiffened slightly, protective instinct rising, but she saw only genuine concern in Victoria's eyes. She has a heart condition. She'll need surgery soon. Hearts can be fixed, Victoria said softly. Mine broke when my husband died. I thought it could never be repaired. I stopped wanting it to be. She looked at Jonathan. I forgot that I still had someone who needed me, someone whose heart would break if I gave up completely. Jonathan's face crumpled with emotion. He laid his head in his mother's lap, and she placed a trembling hand on his hair, stroking it gently the way she must have when he was a child. Grace felt she was witnessing something intensely private. She quietly stood to leave, gesturing for Lily to come with her, but Victoria's voice stopped her. Will you come back? The old woman asked. Will you play for me again? As often as you'd like, Grace promised. Over the following weeks, Grace visited the Sterling estate twice weekly, sometimes 3 times when her schedule allowed. Each visit brought new progress. Victoria began speaking more, eating better, even smiling occasionally. She started asking about Grace's life, about Lily's health, showing genuine interest in their circumstances. Jonathan was present for every session. Watching from a chair in the corner of the conservatory, Grace became increasingly aware of his gaze on her as she played, the intensity in his eyes that spoke of more than gratitude for helping his mother. Sometimes she would glance up and their eyes would meet, and something electric would pass between them. Something neither was ready to acknowledge. One rainy afternoon in late autumn, after Grace finished playing Liszt's Consolation No. 3, Victoria spoke with unusual firmness. Jonathan, take Miss Morrison for a walk in the gardens. Show her the roses before winter arrives. Margaret can keep me company. Jonathan looked surprised. Mother, it's raining. It's barely a drizzle. Go. I want to speak with Margaret about dinner plans. It was clearly a dismissal, and an orchestrated one. Grace felt her cheeks warm as Jonathan helped her into a coat and led her outside. They walked in silence through the garden paths, the light rain misting around them. My mother is matchmaking, Jonathan said finally, a hint of amusement in his voice. She's being remarkably unsubtle about it. Grace laughed nervously. She does seem to have strong opinions about things lately. That's good though, right? It means she's engaged with life again. Thanks to you, Jonathan said, stopping to face her. Grace, you've given me my mother back. I don't know how to properly thank you for that. You've paid me generously, Grace replied, uncomfortable with his gratitude. More than generously. This isn't about money, Jonathan said quietly. He reached out hesitantly, tucking a strand of rain-dampened hair behind her ear. The gesture was gentle, almost reverent. When I watch you play, when I see the joy on my mother's face, when I observe the love you have for your daughter, despite all your struggles, I feel something I haven't felt in years. Hope, warmth, the possibility that life can be more than just business and obligation. Grace's breath caught. Jonathan, I'm not part of your world. I'm a music teacher who lives paycheck to paycheck, a single mother with a mountain of debt. We come from completely different places. None of that matters, Jonathan insisted. What matters is that you've reminded me what it means to be truly alive. My mother sees it too. That's why she keeps pushing us together. Grace wanted to protest, to list all the reasons why this couldn't work, but her heart was betraying her logic. She had fallen for this man despite trying not to. Fallen for his devotion to his mother, his unexpected kindness to Lily, the vulnerability he showed when he thought no one was watching. I'm scared, she admitted, of getting hurt, of Lily getting hurt, of hoping for something that might not be real. Jonathan took her hands in his touch warm despite the cool rain. I'm scared too. I haven't let anyone close since my father died. I built walls around myself because love meant pain and loss. But you've made me want to tear those walls down, to take the risk of feeling again. Before Grace could respond, Lily's voice called from the conservatory doorway. Mommy, Mrs. Victoria says she wants to teach me piano. Can I learn, please? They turned to see Lily standing with Victoria, who had somehow left her wheelchair and was leaning on Margaret's arm. The old woman was smiling, genuinely smiling, in a way Jonathan clearly hadn't seen in years. "You should let her," Victoria called out. "Every child should learn music. It teaches the heart how to feel." Grace looked at Jonathan, seeing her own emotions reflected in his eyes. Fear, hope, wonder, and something deeper that neither was quite ready to name, but both recognized. "Yes," Grace said, answering both Lily and the unspoken question hanging between her and Jonathan. Yes to all of it. As they walked back to the conservatory together, Jonathan's hand found hers and held it gently. Inside, Victoria watched them approach with satisfaction, already planning the dinner where she would properly introduce Grace and Lily to the family friends, already imagining the music room filled with laughter and life again, already seeing the future. Taking shape through the healing power of music and love, the rain continued falling softly on the Sterling estate. But inside the conservatory, warmth bloomed like roses in spring. Grace sat at the piano with Lily beside her on the bench, showing her daughter the basic hand positions, while Jonathan and Victoria watched with matching expressions of contentment. Music had opened doors that seemed permanently closed. It had awakened hearts that had forgotten how to feel. And in that glass-enclosed room overlooking the ocean, for people who had each been lonely in their own way, discovered that sometimes the most beautiful melodies are the ones we create together. The symphonies of connection that transform ordinary lives into something extraordinary. The notes Grace played that afternoon spoke of new beginnings, of families formed not just by blood, but by choice, of love that arrives unexpectedly and changes everything. And as the last chord faded into the autumn air, everyone in that room understood that this was not an ending, but a beginning of something beautiful and true. The end.